My name is Kaspar, and I'm very happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I'm currently working with user research, mostly research projects in Volvo Cars. And I started around 9 years ago as an interaction designer, and so I was put into projects just before the start of the production of the new XC90. And so the work assignments were mostly to do the usability and stuff for whatever the function owners gave us, any function and feature, and there was no room to question if it actually made sense or if the function was built up in a good way. So after we had started producing the vehicles, I moved on to start leading research projects called advanced engineering. So the name already says that it was founded in some sort of technology that we had to investigate and see what kind of use cases would be feasible for that tech and how can we make it implementable in the current products. But the problem was that it was very easy to get into this kind of techno-solutionism mindset, that we took the technology for granted. We didn't really have room to even question if it made sense or not. That decision was done somewhere else. And then of course, because we were following like some sort of processes that were meant for developing technology, like engines and stuff, and we were doing UX, then we were very much in this delivery mode. And of course, maybe many of you know that the companies tend to reward the delivery over discovery. So I moved on to doing PhD and focusing on how can we design more trustworthy, intelligent vehicle technologies and services. And in this talk, I will elaborate a bit like how that opened my mind and gave different perspectives and different ways of thinking and approaches to solve or to apply when working with wicked problems or intelligent technologies. Okay, let's start. So in 2011, there was a guy in the UK, who followed his sat-nav system, and this is a system that was didn't distinguish between a road and a trail, and was guiding him down a path. So he almost fell from like a 30 meters drop, but he was smart enough to stop before. And he said he was using the sat-nav system for 3 months and like 8,000 kilometers a week, so he had no reason not to trust it. In 2016 happened the first accident with a car in autopilot mode. So the function was sold as autopilot, but the sensors failed to distinguish between the white trailer and then the blue sky, and basically cut the car in half. But the driver was very tech enthusiastic, so he was dispositioned to already trust technology, and he was very much involved in this community of that company. So he had built a little bit like irrational trust relationship. This we won't talk about. But to understand these situations, because they both were one ended with an accident, the other one almost ended with some sort of accident. We need to understand how trust is conceptualized. And I speak mostly from our field, like the human-computer interaction discipline perspective, but it, of course, spills over to different disciplines as well. Trust is considered to be very important when we want anyone to accept innovative and new technologies and perhaps also use it. So it has been conceptualized, for example, as an attitude. So it's very much like a rational thing that you think about, and because it's been conceptualized as a cognitive process, then it's much more easier to measure and explain. So because people can say why they started trusting. For example, the GPS or the sat-nav example where he could see that he was in the wrong place, but he had 8,000 kilometers for 3 months every week. So he irrationally started even not trusting his own senses instead of thinking that the sat-nav will take care of it. The other way of thinking is that trust is a feeling. That's very much emotional, and it's very much harder to explain. So if someone asks you why do you trust something, sometimes you just don't know. And that applies, for example, we could interpret that it applies to the second example with the vehicle. There's no real reason to trust the self-driving cars because we know they're not good enough yet, at least not generally. And so these kind of ways of thinking but these of course are not really, basically they can happen together. So you can rationally think about something and you can still feel that you can feel the trust in a different way, as the GPS example showed. But as you saw from the examples, the trust, it depends mostly on the situation of risk or where you can be vulnerable to something. But trust in itself is not really risky because, for example, I can trust an elevator, but I always take the stairs, or I trust the self-driving vehicles, but I will never use them. So it mediates the reliance. So the action you do when you have started to trust something, that can put you in a situation where you can be vulnerable. For example, in the situation of self-driving vehicles. And another thing, that the trust evolves through the experience. So when we use something, we then calibrate our trust. So if we have a good experience, we might trust something more. If we have a bad one, we might trust it a little bit less. But one of the key things with trust research is that in the human-computer interaction, trust is thought about as momentary and transactional. So it's usually said that a person trusts a technology. So we have forgotten that there is a context of use where these interactions happen. And that's very important because it very much depends on the context. For example, you might trust a self-driving vehicle in this kind of situation, but when you compare it with this situation, you might not. Or maybe where there's even a different cultural situation where the traffic is more natural, not so controlled by like road lines and traffic lights. And another example, where current autonomous vehicle technology tends to rely a lot on the road markings. Then, a autonomous car on this road might work better than on this one. So, as I said, it depends a lot on the context. It depends on the social and cultural aspects, and which are often neglected. And also, that means that it hasn't been studied. So we know about what kind of colors to use and when to give feedback and how should a vehicle behave. But we don't know what kind of aspects influence trust when we put these vehicles into the real life circumstances. So if we, if we focus or try to understand how people would envision using the self-driving vehicles as part of their everyday environment. And so the focus in the human-computer interaction has been mostly on system performance aspects and design features, what I mentioned, like how do we give feedback, when do we give it, what do we tell the users, and how should the vehicle behave. And which in turn has, and because the trust has been thought about mostly as this kind of rational thing and that you can measure, the studies are mainly done, like by far mainly, I mean now more than 90% of all the research I reviewed conducted the studies in the laboratory-like environments, which means that they don't really account for the context where these interactions where people would actually use, and they don't evoke the feelings that you would get when you experience it as part of your everyday life. And which means that the outcome, that what we design, is not necessarily trustworthy because we only account for the context of the lab. And now we come to why the trustworthiness. So trustworthiness is something that's usually not discussed in the trust research. And when trust focuses on people, that's how I interpret. You can, of course, say something else. That how I see is that when the trust focuses on people, so marketing and branding, they do a good job to make people to trust your brand and maybe the products. But now when we start focusing on trustworthiness, I see that we put the focus on the actual artifacts that we are designing or services. And so we are focusing on creating products that deserve the trust. And you can think of it in a different way. You can also think that we're shifting the responsibility. So if we build a trust in people and we give the responsibility for them to decide if they act on a product or not, if they start relying on it, if they start using it. But if we start, if we switch to trustworthiness, we switch the focus on us as developers who have the power and knowledge to develop these intelligent systems. So we are the responsible then making products that are worthy of the trust. And that's how it's one of the definitions for trust, is that it's our commitment to fulfill now the trust that we have developed. So now I will move into the things that I wanted to present, like this kind of 3 ways of approaching or thinking about when when solving wicked problems or when designing and developing products. I see them as almost like 3 levels. That the first one, responsible innovation, is the highest, which can apply to any kind of like really big question. And then other one is the human-centered artificial intelligence or human-centered AI, which is more on the system level. And then you have human-centered algorithm design. And I will go briefly through those. So responsible innovation, that's basically, it proposes, they're a little bit like theoretical. But that also gives an opportunity to fill it with whatever methods we think could facilitate this kind of thinking. So responsible innovation, it proposes like 4 principles: reflexivity, anticipation, inclusion, and responsiveness. And just a disclaimer that maybe these things seem very trivial for you, but believe me that in the automotive, it's almost like provocative, because we are still engineering companies. So reflexivity, what that means is basically that we should think, when we develop something, we should think about what kind of assumptions we are developing and attitudes are we developing into our products. And so we also should like blur the boundaries of the role, responsibility that's given us by a company or wherever we work, and then the wider, this kind of moral responsibility in the society. And there's a lot of examples, of course, of these different failed AI systems, for example, that are racist and biased and so on. And if we do this kind of, if we reflect on our own attitudes, we can also start asking questions that what kind of impact does our solution have on the society. And one of the things is, for example, we do a lot of testing with the autonomous vehicles now on the test tracks, and then we publish that we do these things. So I think we are creating this kind of narrative for people. We're creating almost like a need. So people start thinking that this is the future of mobility. And then soon enough, they will start asking us, yeah, I want autonomous vehicle. But then when you are studying people and I use speculative design to put them into scenarios where they imagine this self-driving shared vehicle in their real-life situations, they just wanted a better bus service. So, there's a contradiction. And if we want to really see the impact on the society, we should also engage not only users, but also do it with the other stakeholders, like cities or government institutions, traffic planners, industry, and the researchers from academia, and of course also then the public, because there's no one company who can solve the issue, especially when it comes to these big questions like future mobility. And and then we can also make sure that we are actually solving the right problems. And then it's not enough only to involve, do the research. We should also start trying to solve real problems. And and keep up with the societal needs. And of course, one of the criticism is that that we can't figure out all the needs all the time, but the societal needs usually change much slower than the technology evolves. So I don't think it's really like a problem. I'm going to show you a couple of videos, and that's just to illustrate how we haven't really evolved in our visions of future autonomous vehicles. One is a bit long, maybe I will cut it, but we'll see.
FB2 to tower. We're heading for Chicago. Please route us through. Over.
Roger, FB2. View screen map shows your location within our control zone. You have your choice of 2 routes. Green line marks scenic route. Red line shorter route.
We're on vacation. Who wants to fly?
Yeah, that means green. I'll tell the guy. Firebird to tower. We'll take the green.
Roger. Check your fuel and engine.
Check. Fuel supply 3/4 full. Good for 662 miles or 6 1/3 hours. Gas turbine compressor 31,000 RPM. Gas turbine transmission 26,500 RPM. Turbine inlet temperature 1450
Looks
degrees.
very complicated.
Turbine exhaust temperature 350 degrees. We're all set for auto control.
Roger, Firebird 2. Move to electronic control strip in center lane. Synchronize your speed and direction.
Check. I'll tune speed first. Now I'll tune direction.
We're coming in on the beam, Dad.
Well done, Firebird 2. You're now under automatic control. Hands-off steering.
I should stop here, but there will be some how they see what opportunities it gives as well.
Here we go on the high-speed safety lane. Ah, this is the life. Safe, cool, comfortable. Mind if I smoke a cigar?
Oh, not with this wonderful air conditioning. Hey, you want some ice cream or a cool drink?
Orange juice, please. Oh, me too.
I'm gonna go for the ice cream. Thank you, dear.
So, okay, it's a little bit long, but this was a vision from General Motors in 1956 that the self-driving vehicles will be like this in 1976. And to not really contrast, but to add to this is now a video that we in Volvo released in 2018 or 19. And yeah, and then I will give a little bit context as well. The only video I found was from this. But so not much has changed in our visions. Still a white man driving. And now after 100 years, almost 100 years of developing cars, it's only still one man driving somewhere. But and one of the other assumptions is that we want to let go of control. but if we know from the environmental psychology that it's a basic need for a person to have a control over their environment, so we need to think in different ways, and then I would say that this responsible innovation, these principles and this way of thinking, we can start like untangling the alternatives for these kind of visions. So let's move on to the next one. Is the human-centered AI. It's this kind of school of thought, I would say. So the axis you see is that this is basically the foundation of not foundation, that's a big word. So it's used, basically this is the logic when we develop the self-driving vehicles, that we have the level 0, which is that the human is fully in control, regular cars, without any assistive systems, and the level 5, which is then the fully self-driving vehicle. But as I said before, but we need to have a control of our environment. Then the Schneiderman, who is very big in the human-computer interaction or interaction design, he proposed that, okay, what if we now rethink the balance between the human control and automation control, and see really where do we need to have where do the humans have to have less control and where do they have to have more control, and so to think about this automation on this two axes, that it's not only that we take over control, but how can we make people to actually be better at whatever they do, and how do we reduce the accidents that come from human errors, for example. And human errors now, I mean that if we drop a phone, and that is the most important thing while driving, then we don't crash necessarily. That kind of things. And then the last thing is about the human-centered algorithm design. So that's very much like focused on the algorithm level, because there's so many stories about how the algorithms are, not really considering people, the lay people. Then there's like 3 strategies to think about or to apply in the algorithm development practice. One that's been proposed is the theoretical strategy, which divides into 2. One is the prescriptive part and descriptive. Prescriptive is that we add to the data sets that we use to then train our models, we add behavior and the social data. So we try to bring the real people, human perspective into the data sets, so we don't focus only on the weather and road conditions and so on. And the other one is the descriptive part. The idea there is to involve the people, the actual users, to interpret the outcomes from the algorithms. So it's not only that what we as a developers intended, but it's also we try to understand how people interpret the outcome and then maybe feed it back into the algorithms. The other strategy, participatory strategy, that I guess it's very much in hearts of ours, is that to really involve the citizens early. In my case, citizens, but users early stages. So we make sure that we're actually solving the real-world problems. So we don't invent things or assume that we are doing it. And the third strategy is the speculative strategy. So the main point is to help or to support the developers to come out from their comfort zone or their everyday, not comfort zone even, the boundaries that they form or condition their work environment. And so they can imagine what kind of alternative solutions could they develop, or what kind of impact their work could have actually on the society. So punchline. So, so I believe that, and now I talk as a UX designer and researcher to UX people, that I think the UX people have the skills and the knowledge and the responsibility then to contribute to these socially sustainable futures that are worthy of trust. And this is the main thing.